nature. Disgusting is the only word I have to describe it.
War Chief, without these new Forsaken, my people would die out. Our hold upon Gilneas and Northern Lordaeron would crumble.
Have you given any thought to what this means, Sylvanas? What difference is there between you and the Lich King now?
Isn't it obvious, War Chief? I serve the Horde.
Sylvanas Windrunner is one of the most interesting characters in World of Warcraft. Her story is one of rise and fall, of redemption and revenge. She was a prominent ranger general who was struck down trying to defend her homeland against a scourge, only to be resurrected by her killer, Arthas Menethil. However, she was able to eventually break free from her restraints, and, while she did not rejoin her people, in her new undead form she began to build an empire of ex-scourge who would become known as the Forsaken. They would eventually join the Horde, where Sylvanas would rise to prominence, get revenge against the Lich King, and even eventually become the war chief of the whole Horde itself. She seems like a hero of Thrall-like proportions, an epic tale of redemption. And yet, well, something's wrong with it. You see, while Sylvanas might appear to be a good leader on the surface, many of her actions have been unsavory in nature. When looking at her establishment of the Forsaken and her conquering of Lordaeron, she definitely took sort of a join me or die kind of attitude. I mean, she basically just went in there and steamrolled anything in her way. So it's not exactly like she's always been a goody two-shoes, but she was never really a terrible person. She was always doing it in a way to make her own path in the world, and eventually establish the Forsaken. However, the thing is, this kind of changed throughout the course of World of Warcraft, where she has taken increasingly drastic measures against her enemies, all for the sake of her people. It all really started to manifest during Cataclysm, when Garrosh ordered an attack on the people of Gilneas. During the siege, Sylvanas used the extremely dangerous Forsaken Blight against the people of Gilneas, which was basically a poisonous sort of substance that was just very dangerous, killed things very quickly, was able to raise undead thralls, do things like that. Very, very dangerous. And while yes, Sylvanas didn't call the shots and the attack was ordered by Garrosh, she used basically the equivalent of a dirty bomb against innocent, unarmed civilians. I mean, this was some serious Geneva Convention violating stuff. Things that in the real world would be considered crimes against humanity. If you ever played through the Worgen starting zone, trust me, most of the time you're pretty much just running away from the Forsaken. Yes, you fight a bit, and I know that most of the Gilnean citizens escape, but a lot of them don't. It really is a slaughter, and Sylvanas really is brutal in her attacks. Additionally, during the same time period, she gained command of the Valkyr, who were able to use their powers to raise dead, essentially creating new Forsaken. Sylvanas justified this as a necessary thing, given the fact that the Forsaken could not procreate. However, the problem was that not everyone who the Valkyr resurrected wanted to be alive anymore. Many of them did not want to be a part of the Forsaken. And yes, while technically Sylvanas did not force these new undead to be loyal to her, there really wasn't any other place that an undead would be accepted in besides the Horde. With a few exceptions, anywhere else they would be outcasts and freak shows. Sylvanas knew this very well, that it was difficult to be accepted in this world as an undead if you weren't part of the Forsaken. So she was essentially creating slaves for the Forsaken, raising people against their will, and creating people who, for the most part, essentially had no choice but to join the Forsaken. Along with this, a lot of people lost memories of their former lives. Not everybody, but a lot of ones, especially that have been dead for a while, lost their old memories, so they no longer remembered who they were. So Sylvanas is really taking advantage of a large group of people and definitely walking a pretty tight moral tightrope in her justifications. In fact, even some current Forsaken decided to leave the faction because they didn't like of what had become of their leader. The fact that she was so brutal in her campaign was off-putting to a lot of people. One of these was a Forsaken apothecary who decided to leave the Forsaken and join the Argent Crusade, who's located at Plaguewood Tower. He says that, quote, "I used to admire her, but something's changed within her. She's not herself anymore." The rest of the Horde were also uneasy about her decisions, not sure if she was really evil or not really sure if she was justified in her actions, and a lot of them were probably afraid that she was going to use the Valkyr as a way to create a never-ending army, similar to the Lich King. But, as Sylvanas said herself, she was loyal to the Horde, and so everybody moved on. She didn't do anything else crazy after the Cataclysm, as it seemed that Blizzard calmed down a bit on her Lich King vibe for a while. Pretty much through all of Mists of Pandaria, she kind of just sat there and twiddled her thumbs, biding her time to do some more human rights violations. And oh boy, did her time come. First of all, I have to talk about the Valkyr for a second. Along with raising new undead servants for Sylvanas, the Valkyr are also capable of sacrificing themselves to save Sylvanas' life, essentially making her immortal as long as she has enough around. Basically, she's kind of like Lord Voldemort, and the Valkyr are her Horcruxes. They give her extra lives. How's that for making her sound like a villain? The only problem with this setup was that she didn't have many Valkyr left at her disposal, because really, the way that she got the Valkyr was they were originally bound to the Lich King, but after the new Lich King, Bolvar, decided to take a back seat for a while, they basically got bored and looked for a new master, and so Sylvanas tried to kill herself by throwing herself off the frozen throne after Arthas was defeated, and the Valkyr basically saved her and bound themselves to her. But of course, now she only has a few left, putting herself and the whole of the Forsaken at risk of extinction. When Legion finally rolled around and Sylvanas found herself embroiled in another conflict, she did the only thing that was reasonable: capture a deity and try to force them to hand over all the Valkyr to her, essentially making her and the Forsaken invincible. She actually used the player character to capture a goddess and try to force them to give all the Valkyr to her.
Traitorous banshee! You know not what you are meddling with! Submit. The Valkyr are mine.
Your quest for immortality has left you vulnerable. I will have my vengeance! For Varian! For Gilneas! For my son!
It seems I overestimated you, old wolf.
You took my son's future. And now, I've taken yours.
Greymane stepped in for revenge and stopped her from becoming unstoppable, but it's scary to think what might have happened. With the fervor in which she approached the situation, and the sheer vileness in which she used the player characters upon for her schemes, it was clear to me that she was only in this for herself, hoping to become immortal as the ultimate power play, with an infinite, or nearly infinite, supply of Valkyr at her disposal. Not to mention that with the death of Vol'jin, she was now the new war chief of the Horde, and for a minute there, it almost looked like we were going to have another Siege of Orgrimmar situation on our hands. Boy, the Horde sure know how to pick their leadership, am I right? But hey, luckily none of that happened, and we were instead left peacefully alone as we defeated the Legion. Sargeras dead, Legion no more. Yay, everybody's happy, and Sylvanas accepted the fact that Arthas was long dead, and she held one of the most powerful positions in the world, realizing her people were now safe, and she no longer needed to use chemical weapons on villagers and kill everything in her path. Nah, just kidding. She decided to burn down Teldrassil. How nice. Seriously, she's done worse things than Garrosh at this point. How in the world has nobody decided to collectively come together and curb stomp her yet? I mean, look, don't get me wrong, I really do love Sylvanas. She's one of the coolest characters in WoW, and is one of my personal favorites. She's very complex, has a really cool backstory, and she's just one of the coolest characters. I really do love her. But oh boy, she's committed some serious war crimes, and I feel like the tally is going to just keep going up and up. Now, I'm not sure if we're ever going to actually see Sylvanas as an enemy in WoW, but I feel like there definitely is a chance. Her shenanigans seem to be reaching a breaking point, and I think it won't be too long until we put a stop to the Banshee Queen's reign once and for all. But then again, the question remains, is Sylvanas truly evil? This is a tough question to answer. On one hand, she's blazed a trail of destruction, letting nothing stop her from expanding her power and influence over the years, especially with the most recent content in the BFA pre-patch that's currently live. However, she doesn't always seem to be entirely selfish. It's been shown in the past how she still felt guilty about not defending Silvermoon from the Scourge, and has repeatedly supplied troops and supplies to the Blood Elves. Additionally, she has been shown to genuinely care about her people, and while I do believe she uses the Valkyr for her own personal gain, I do also think that she uses them in part because she does care about the survival of the Forsaken as a whole. When you look at the big picture, everything that she's done has benefited her people in some way or another. Granted, a lot of it was terribly immoral and wrong to do, but she didn't do it simply to kill people. When I started making this video, I felt like she was in many ways very similar to the Lich King. I still do think she is, but there are some key differences. She doesn't have dominion over a mindless army. The Forsaken are free-willed people. Now granted, she does hold leverage over them in regards to the inclusivity of the Forsaken faction, but they still aren't mindless thrall, unlike the Scourge minions that Arthas created. So here we are, Sylvanas Windrunner. Bad guy or not? Is she the quote-unquote Lich Queen? Is she truly evil, or are her actions justified? Is she truly doing all of this for the Horde and her people, or simply for her own gain? I think that only she knows the answer. Only time will tell what direction Blizzard takes her in the future, because while she is a vicious and brutal leader committing morally heinous acts, there's always been some kind of a reason. And it's not always just been power-hungry warmongering. She has always had a concern for her people, even if it may not always be at the forefront of her actions. And despite her seeming to be similar to Garrosh in his lust for power, there's one key difference between the war chiefs. Sylvanas has never gone against the Horde.